I genuinely hate to be the person to have to break this to you, but the church, both systematically and individually, is a business. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it means essentially the way that a church strives, thrives, and survives is really no different than any other corporation in America. But the church began so innocent, didn't it? Well, not really. Read through Romans, read through most of Paul's epistles where he's writing directly to a church body or even some of the ones to an individual. He's complaining a lot of the time about what these churches are doing. He expresses disappointment. He's pleading, he's teaching, he's trying to reach the people there, the pastors, the believers. He's trying to connect with them. And why? Well, because they were failing. They were twisting the messages, they were twisting the ministry, and they were twisting the work that Christ came to do. In many cases, they were extremely legalistic. They were getting caught on things that now we would claim or say are non-essential. So as much as I want to blame the modern church for all of the brokenness that we see, it's really not new. Christians have always argued, and the church began splitting a very, very long time ago. The differences between the failures of the historic church and the modern church, however, is this. The historic church began to split primarily due to conflicts of tradition and applicational arguments of the Torah. Essentially, how its contents should be integrated into this New Testament way of living, or if they should be integrated at all. There isn't much, if any, historical documentation that the early church, at least not in their main arguments or issues, were concerned about finances or about business practices, mostly because the historic church wasn't really a business yet. See, this idea of the church becoming an actual functioning business, it didn't happen until much later. Now, I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine what ekklesia was actually like, which means church. It's a Greek word for church. What was church like during Paul's time in ministry? What was the ekklesia? What did that look like? Ekklesia literally translates to an assembly of believers. Now, as you imagine this, I want you to kind of imagine a small group, because if we were to picture the historic church, these groups of believers, in most cases, not all, these were more akin to what we would picture nowadays as a small group within a much bigger church. They were in many cases groups of believers less than 20 people. And in many cases, it was half or less than that. See, they would meet primarily inside of people's homes or out in public spaces where they could speak about Christ. And due to their small size, they were much more interactive. Similar to, like I said, a small group today. There was more conversation. It wasn't always just one person speaking at a group of people. Now, again, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to picture a church in modern time. And even better, I want you to picture a mega church. Now, your second picturing looks nothing like your first picturing, right? They're vastly different. We're talking about a small group of people, 20 or less in most cases, many times 10 or less, where it's more of a conversation, it's more of a dialogue, it's more interactive. And on the other side, you're picturing a stadium, essentially in many cases, and even if not a stadium, a very large building that has rows of seats, and it's not interactive whatsoever. It's one person up on a stage, elevated physically above the rest, speaking at a group of people. There's very little, if any, interaction between the pastor and the congregants during a church service. Now, as you picture the megachurch side of things, and you're picturing what that looks like in application, you're picturing a preacher or pastor up on a stage. He's giving what we call a sermon, right? Now, in modern times, a sermon involves no interaction between pastor and congregant. A sermon largely contains small amounts of scripture, if any, at times, and large amounts of illustrations and storytelling. Now, granted, these stories, these illustrations are meant to convey usually a message or an ideal from the Bible, but the actual use of biblical text in most modern day churches is very minimal. Now, I do want to note that obviously the Bible is full of illustrations, so I'm not trying to say anything against the way that we're giving sermons nowadays, that illustrations and storytelling is bad. Like, no, the Bible is full of stories, it's full of illustrations. But the fact that sermons today, that when you go to church today, the vast majority of what you receive from the church is that storytelling, and there's very little push on actual education of Scripture, how to read Scripture, what Scripture really says. We're almost solely and only trying to get a feel-good message across from the church to the congregants. Now, the modern church is first and foremost a business, and I don't necessarily say that disparagingly, so just kind of hear me out. These churches are usually held in large buildings with excessive seating capabilities, run by a staff that earns a living wage. Now, we have to hit volunteers. Volunteers obviously work for free. What is the main purpose of having volunteers in a church? It's to keep your overhead low. It's to be able to save finances, to be able to pay staff's wages, to be able to pay for mission trips, and to be able to have money to be able to pay for other church expenses. Without volunteers, churches would honestly be in trouble. Churches have bills, and bills are required to be paid in order for the doors of the church to remain open. If the church stopped operating as a business, the church would not be able to stay open. It's really as simple as that. But what does this really mean? How do you break this down and say, sure, church is a business? That sounds really dirty. What do you mean? Well, beyond what I've already said, you have to understand churches have a clientele. They have a customer. They have a patron. In our case, we call them congregants. Congregants are necessary for the church, just like customers at a coffee shop are necessary for the coffee shop. If congregants, customers, stop coming, then there's no revenue, and then the church closes down. And what is the easiest way to lose congregants? It is teaching or preaching theological concepts or rough messages that turn the congregants off because they disagree with them. This is honestly why most sermons in your run-of-the-mill church have theologically dry messages. There is a fear in the church of offending congregants and losing customers, for the simple fact that the congregants might not agree with what the pastor is teaching. See, every church chooses a denomination, and in business terms, we would call this a demographic. Even non-denominational churches go to their church website, click on the beliefs tab on their website, and read through their list of beliefs. It will fall under either Arminian, open theism, Calvinist. It will fall under an already set, predefined, predetermined, already existing theological bend. There is no such thing as a non-denominational church. A non-denominational church would be a church that teaches all theologies, and I have yet to find one of those. So every church chooses a denomination or a theology to teach, but either way, they have to pick at least one, if not both, and then that is how they decide what their demographic is. So if this church chooses Baptist as their denomination, then Baptist people is their demographic. That is their congregation. That is their customer. So then what is a Baptist church not going to do? They're not going to teach Methodist theology. They're not going to teach Catholic theology, because then they would upset or offend their demographic, aka their customer, and then their customers would leave. Now we're going to run through some of the financial practices within the church. Churches, like any business, run functionally off of cash flow. Otherwise, they would have no employees, no salaried or hourly employees. They would be functioning off of volunteers only. And trust me, most churches, once you get to the upper small level and to the medium level, as far as your size, you cannot function off of volunteers alone. Are there ways of running a financially honest church? Well, of course, but there are very few churches that choose to do this. I have worked with or for one church in my life, and I've only heard of that one church in my life who had a financially honest way of running their business. And the term honest, I understand it's a loose term. So what I should really say is transparent. Financially transparent churches would require reports to be complete and public to their congregation. When was the last time you saw your church's financial reports? I would venture to say that the answer is probably never. This should read like a P&L because it is a P&L. I currently manage a construction and restoration company, so I get monthly and yearly and quarterly P&Ls. For those of you who don't know, what a P&L is, essentially, is your revenue, your earnings, your profit, your expenses, your overhead. It is a full report of all the money coming in and out of your business for all different reasons. Depending on your kind of business, that'll look kind of different, but that is, in essence, what a P&L is for any business. Now, for a church who is financially transparent with their congregation, there would be a list of things that you would read. So this is what they would be. You'd have tithes to date. That would be your primary revenue for the church. You would have above and beyond donations. These are usually seasonal or quarterly extra earning runs that the church does to try to bring in more revenue, more income. You would have revenue from any other businesses that the church has. Some churches own bookshops or coffee shops or other businesses within the community or within the physical church itself. Those are other revenue income streams. So that would be on this report as well. You'd have all the salaries for all the employees. You'd have all the hourly rates for all the employees. It would be a total number, but it would be depicted on the sheet. You would have business expenses, overhead. This would be things like cups of coffee for Sunday morning, chairs, lights, fog machines nowadays, screens for the computers, screens for up on the stage behind the pastor, the dunk tanks for the baptisms, right? All these things would be overhead expenses for the church that would be on your P&L. There would be another line usually for something like technology subscriptions, social media managers, marketing, sales. These are like evangelical costs. It's Facebook marketplace ads. Then beyond that, you'd have rent for the building, unless the church owned the building, but there are still expenses. You have utilities, right? These are bills that have to be paid. You would have something else probably for most churches that would be missionary expenses. These are mission trips, leaders' wages, travel expenses, stipends while these people are out. And that's a limited number. It would be a lot more stuff than that. But that at least, all that should at least be on a church's P&L. And in my opinion, a financially transparent church would make those reports public to their congregation. If you think churches' financial reports should be transparent, open, honest, and publicly available to the congregation, to the people who are paying their salaries, then like this video for me. As I mentioned, I did work with a church who was financially transparent with their congregation. I didn't work for them, but I worked with them on some projects. What this meant was everyone in the congregation, I believe they did it twice a year or 4 times. They either did it quarterly or biannually. I can't remember. But they would basically on Sunday morning at every service, they would put up on the screen behind the pastor their financials, and they would talk about it for about 10-15 minutes, explain where the congregants' money is actually going, meaning they knew how much the lead pastor made. They knew how much the youth pastor made in comparison to the lead pastor. They knew how much total the church was spending on other staff salaries. They knew how much the church was spending on things like lighting, graphics designer, social media marketing, and advertising. They knew how much of their money was actually going towards feeding the hungry, going towards mission trips. This was all public and available and shown to you if you showed up on the day that they made it public for the church. But at any time, you could go on their website and you could pull financials for any year. I feel this is the only way to run a truly honest church. And of course, this is my opinion. I am entitled to my opinion. My opinion is not fact. It is what I feel inside of myself. But we have seen way too much of misappropriation, actual funneling, and mishandling of finances within the systematic church. A place where transparency, honesty, respect, and accountability should be beyond what the secular world is. Having a public and transparent financial plan and availability to your congregants as a church is an incredible way of building trust with those people who both attend your church and literally pay your salary. You as congregants are the sole reason that church is alive. You are the reason that pastor can feed his kids. You are the reason that everybody that works there is able to pay their bills. You then should have the right to see where the money is going. What is being allocated to what, and how much these people are making. Again, just my opinions. I know a lot of people are going to disagree and hate with this, and I am comfortable with that, as usual. If you learned something today, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done that already. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the places. I am kind of posting different things to different places now, so if you are not on one, you are potentially missing something. You know I will always be honest, transparent, and open about anything that I choose to put my face out here and talk about. And as always, you have my word that I will forever teach opposing and different theological views about any scriptural study or topic that we are going into, because I do not believe in boxing you guys in to one theology, the one that I personally agree with. And I do have a theology. I have a specific bend, the lens that I look through, but I do not believe in pushing that on you guys. I believe in showing you what the different ones are, what two at least opposing views are, and then leaving you as the intelligent person that you are to decide for yourself where you land. And a third promise, just for good measure, whenever I make mistakes in these videos, and verifiably I'm wrong, I will always jump back up here, admit my fault, apologize if necessary, and then make a correction. If you want a deeper dive into any of the topics that we went into today, the subtopics within finances in a church and a church operating as a business, let me know. And I can definitely pull something from it and kind of do a deeper dive into one aspect of this. Until then, as usual, I love you guys.